to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really interesting look at money, how we talk about it, how we think about it.
Yeah, and we're doing that by looking at two pretty different English learning audio sources we checked out.
Exactly. So first up, we've got parts of the Let's Talk About Money podcast. That one gives you a great feel for, everyday money words, spending habits, saving tips.
Right, and real English phrases too. They even had a role play and some cultural bits comparing the US and UK.
And then the second source, that was a transcript from YouTube, the English Podcast Zone, their money episode.
Yes, that one was quite different. A dialogue about debt, especially during a recession.
Yeah, and it highlighted vocabulary like recession and broke. Some specific language takeaways, useful phrases.
And interestingly, different cultural attitudes towards debt, comparing North America and Europe.
So our mission today really is to dig into these two sources.
Yeah, pull out the key stuff.
Yes.
The practical English vocabulary about money.
We want to give you a clear, kind of concise understanding of how these money concepts pop up in different learning materials.
And maybe, trigger a few aha moments about language and how we see finance.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. Foundational language first, maybe. Basic money words.
Sounds good. Both sources hit on some key terms. Let's talk about money. Use words like budget.
Right, you're a plan for your money.
And save up. Putting money aside bit by bit for something specific.
Plus the real basics, spend, cost, or price, debt.
Which is owing money, yeah. And credit card, loan, cash. Pretty standard stuff.
And the English pod source, the YouTube one, it focused on two words in particular.
Yeah, recession. They explained it as like an economic downturn for a country.
Job losses, people spending less.
Right, maybe stocks falling. You feel it across the board.
And the other word?
Broke.
Which just means, having absolutely no money.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to how we actually use money day to day, spending habits. The Let's Talk About Money chat gave us a good glimpse there. Tom, one of the speakers, mentioned his biggest costs were food and transport.
Yeah, I think that's relatable for a lot of us.
Definitely. And Sarah, the other speaker, she shared a really practical tip, using a shopping list for groceries.
To keep spending under control, right?
Exactly. It shows how this basic vocabulary helps us talk about, something really central to life, our spending.
Whether it's, cutting back on eating out or finding cheaper travel options.
Right. And Sarah using a budgeting app. That's a good example of tech meeting finance awareness now.
Totally. Now, one thing I really liked in the Let's Talk About Money source was their section on real English expressions, idioms and things.
Oh yeah, those were great. Like, I'm broke. We just defined that one.
And it's not worth it. Use that when the cost, maybe in time or money or effort, is just too high for the benefit.
Yeah, good one. And the classic, money doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah. A vivid way to say, be careful with your spending.
For sure. And the last one they mentioned, live paycheck to paycheck.
That really paints a picture, doesn't it? Someone whose income basically just covers bills each month, no room left over.
Understanding those idioms,
yeah,
it adds a whole other layer to understanding spoken English and finance chat.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Strategies for saving, for budgeting.
Right. Tom, again from Let's Talk About Money, had some simple advice. Cook at home more.
Sensible.
Yeah.
And walk instead of taking taxis, if you can.
Yeah, and setting up some kind of regular saving system. Just making it automatic.
These are all really concrete things you can actually do.
And Sarah mentioned something interesting, kind of old school, envelope budgeting.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Basically, you put actual cash into different envelopes for different things.
Yeah.
Like this much for food, this much for entertainment.
Ah, I see. A very hands-on way to track where the money's going.
Exactly. Very direct. The language around it is pretty straightforward too.
The Let's Talk About Money podcast even had a little role play. A shop scene.
Right. Sarah asking about the price of a shirt.
And asking about payment. Cash or card.
Just a perfect little snapshot of everyday financial language in action.
And their listener challenge was interesting too. It was about wanting something expensive, right?
Yeah, and needing to save up for it. It just highlights those common goals we have and the challenges.
Dude, described really simply, accessible language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's pivot now to the cultural side of things.
Right, because money isn't just numbers, is it? Culture plays a big role.
The Culture Corner in Let's Talk About Money touched on US and UK habits.
Yeah, they mentioned how common credit cards are in the US.
Okay.
Though, interestingly, they also noted maybe a slight trend back towards cash.
Oh, that's interesting. And in the UK.
The idea of saving for a rainy day. That's such a common phrase there.
Putting money aside for unexpected problems later on.
Exactly. And both sources kind of hinted that in both places, talking openly about personal finances can be seen as, well, a bit private.
So that starts to show how culture shapes not just what we do with money, but how we talk or don't talk about it.
And that cultural influence really comes through strongly in the English pod dialogue about debt during a recession.
Right. That story was quite something. Someone loses their job, they're deep in debt.
Yeah. Credit card bills, car payments, a mortgage.
Even college tuition fees mentioned.
And then the surprising twist where they go for a loan. Not a bank, but
The mob.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the irony is, even the mob is broke because the recession is hitting everyone.
It's kind of darkly humorous, but it really underlines how bad a recession can get.
And it names those common types of debt people often struggle with.
That English Pod transcript also had a specific language takeaway section, really useful for learners.
Definitely. They broke down the word loan, borrowing money. And made sure people didn't confuse it with a loan.
Good point. They also explained mortgage.
Right, the specific loan for buying property. And they even gave a pronunciation tip. The T is silent. Mortgage.
Ah, helpful. And the phrase hit me pretty hard.
Meaning something had a big negative impact. They gave examples like, a divorce, getting sick, losing someone. Things that affect you deeply.
Makes sense. And finally, tuition.
The money you pay for education, especially college or university.
Okay. And building on that, they also had a fluency builder part.
Yeah, useful everyday phrases like, what can I do for you?
Just a polite way to offer help.
Exactly. And I'm really sorry to trouble you.
For when you need to bother someone, apologize for the inconvenience, like asking for a signature or something.
Yeah, they gave examples like that. And the last one was on top of all that.
Meaning, in addition to everything else.
Right. And it can be for good things or bad things. You just pile one more thing on.
Okay, so bringing these threads together, that English Pod segment really dug into cultural views on debt.
It did. It contrasted North America, the US, and Canada with Europe.
So in North America, debt is often seen as, well, normal, even necessary sometimes.
Kind of, yeah. Especially for building a credit history. You need that history for big things like mortgages, car loans.
And they mention banks giving credit cards to university students almost routinely.
Which really highlights that cultural acceptance or even encouragement of taking on debt early.
But in Europe, using Switzerland as an example, the attitude is different.
Much more cautious, generally. The example they gave was needing to deposit more money than your credit limit just to get a credit card.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It really shows contrasting ways of thinking about borrowing and managing money.
So when we wrap this all up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
I think it's just how incredibly varied the English language is when it comes to money.
Yeah, from simple transactions right up to big economic issues.
And these really different cultural takes on something as fundamental as debt.
So it's not just about knowing the words like loan or budget.
Exactly. It's also about understanding the context, the cultural background that shapes how we use those words, how we feel about the concepts.
And these two sources, in their own ways, gave us a good look at both the language and that context.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we finish, here's something for you, the listener, to think about. How does your own background, your culture, your personal experiences, how do they shape how you think and talk about money?
Do these perspectives we discussed today resonate with you? Or maybe clash with your own views?
And what other questions does this bring up for you? Maybe about financial habits elsewhere in the world or the specific language used?
Definitely something to mull over.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.